Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. So this is a special episode for you today. It's just going to be you and me and talking about the industry. And the unofficial name of these solo episodes have been Roddy Rants. But the official name of today's episode is the RSPA State of the Industry report. So this is a modified version of what I delivered July 29th during the general session at the RSPA's RetailNOW trade show and conference held in Vegas. And so I have to say it's a little weird for me to say that in the past tense because I'm recording this prior to RetailNOW. So there's a few reasons why I'm doing that. First, the state of the industry isn't going to shift dramatically in a week or so from when I record this. And then also the biggest one is practice makes perfect. And so I've done a lot of presenting over the years and coach a lot of folks on presenting. And the number one thing to have a great presentation or as good a presentation as possible is to make sure you prepare. And so this is another step in that preparation in terms of doing a rehearsal, but I'm doing a rehearsal and recording it so everybody is able to enjoy it. There's also a personal element to this as well. So I wanted to get this industry report out to everybody soon after RetailNOW, and right after RetailNOW, my family is going to be staying out in Vegas for a little bit of R&R, and then the following week, I get the joy of having a colonoscopy, which is going to put me out of commission for a couple days. So you're probably like, wow, that's too much information. Please, can we get to the State of the Industry report? And the answer to that for sure is yes. We will get to that in 1 second. First, I have to say, if you're listening to the audio-only version of this on however you consume the podcast, you're going to get some value out of this for sure. There will be more value if you're able to follow along because I am sharing slides on our YouTube channel presentation. So, all right, now, before we get to the report, we have to make sure we thank our sponsors who support the RSPA community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our platinum sponsor is Blue Star. Our gold sponsors are CoCard, Epson, Heartland, and ScanSource. And then also RetailNOW is in the rearview mirror, so it's time to start looking ahead and saving the date for Inspire 2025, the Retail IT Channel's premier leadership conference. RSPA Inspire is set for January 26th through 29th in beautiful Curacao, that is just south of Puerto Rico, a 1 hour flight difference south. For more information on RSPA Inspire, visit gorspa.org/inspire so you can experience networking nirvana. RetailNOW is an awesome event. Inspire is a totally different vibe, super, super valuable event. Really, really hope to see folks there. All right, I'm going to get a sip of water here, and then we are going to jump into the State of the Industry report. All right, well, welcome everybody to the annual RSPA State of the Industry report. Now, when I delivered the State of the Industry report in 2023, a year ago, it was at RetailNOW. The RSPA, the association, was celebrating its 75th anniversary, and everything that we did was really in the context of, 75 years and looking back on the past 75 years. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if the next year I could get up on stage and tell everybody what the retail IT channel is going to look like in 75 years? But then I thought to myself, wait a second, what if 75 years ago, right back in 1949, somebody would have explained to a bunch of cash register dealers what the future's going to look like? They'd have to say, okay, guys, here's what it's going to be. They couldn't say guys and gals, they'd just say guys. They'd say generative AI. That's what's going to be what folks are talking about. Online ordering, computer vision, and everything's going to be in the cloud. Right, the folks listening to that would say, that's crazy talk. Like, I don't even understand what those words mean except for cloud, right? And it makes no sense what you're talking about in that context. So to avoid you thinking that I've gone insane, I'm not going to try to predict the state of our industry 75 years ahead. I'm not going to look ahead long term. But the State of the Industry report today is going to focus on where we are today, and then also look at the near term future, because our job as leaders is to look ahead as far ahead as we can in an appropriate standpoint. So What I'm going to do, I'm going to share with you 8 macro trends, and we're going to build the list as we go along. So we always start, before we get to the exact trends, we have to talk about what's going on from a business model standpoint. So what you see here on your screen are the 4 main bubbles, the buckets, the business models that we have, right? VAR, vendor, distributor, that's always been there, and as software has emerged, we have the ISVs as well. And the size of the bubbles that we have here are based on the number of entities that are playing in that space. And so the new bubbles that we've seen come on the horizon, the new business models, managed services providers, we have ISOs who are hybrid ISOs because they're really acting as VARs now, not just only with payments. Then you have payment facilitators. They're essentially like ISVs who take on a lot of the payments burdens. And the bottom right side of the screen, there's a giant gaping hole there, but that's been filled up with the biggest bubble of them all, what we call the DISDs, the direct independent software developers. These are the niche ISVs. These are the folks that we see as the new VARs. They are very much bundling together a lot of products and technologies and services, just like a VAR, but they are also including and oftentimes leading with their own software. So these are the bubbles. And if you notice, again, those watching on YouTube, you can see that there's discoloration in the DISD bubble. And that represents the churn that we're having in our industry. And that's the first macro trend that we have, DISD churn and a lot of volatility in that space, right? What we see of these small niche ISVs, some of them went to market too early and they didn't have a great go-to-market plan and they fell by the wayside. Some of them have changed their focus. They focused on one niche, they switched to a different niche that went outside of our industry. Some of them, because of those reasons or because they weren't financially backed appropriately, they fell into financial trouble. And so they've gone away or they've been absorbed by other organizations. And then also some of them have been wildly successful. And we have lots and lots of those members here inside the RSPA today. We also look at some of these giant direct software providers, right? The VC-backed organizations who are selling POS and payments directly. We've seen a lot of them accumulate big losses as they gain market share. But that also represents some uncertainty or some volatility in the market because you don't know what they're going to be like long term when they're losing millions and millions every quarter. So that's the first trend. And then the second trend that we see is the VAR. The VAR business model is relative to the DISD model steady, right? There has been some churn, but it's far, far less what we see in the niche ISV space. We do see VARs going away, but it's more that they're fading, right? They're retiring, they're getting acquired. We've seen a slight acceleration versus normal times with that. That's because of some of these acquisitions, but it hasn't been anything rapid. It's been, if anything, steady or maybe a slow decline. So are we ready to shrink the VAR bubble? And the answer is no, not yet, right? We have not seen that in the RSPA. We still have about 450-ish VAR members, reseller members, and we've seen a lot of those folks. They've been growing very much under the radar and becoming more sophisticated. That doesn't get the headlines, but it definitely is a trend. And so folks have been wringing their hands for VARs ever since I've been involved in the channel for almost 25 years now. And to paraphrase Mark Twain, right? Rumors of my demise continue to be greatly exaggerated. So again, the VAR, the relative steadiness of the VAR business model, that's also a trend. Let's talk about vendors, especially hardware vendors, right? So they've seen a lot of turbulence. And so the question is, this is macro trend number 3, what's going to be the pivot for some of these hardware companies, right? They've had shrinking margins. They had supply chain issues with COVID and then after COVID as well. They have to battle against a lot of cheap imitators as well. And there's been oftentimes the commoditization of hardware because folks are really focusing on the software part of the solution. It reminds me, and the situation that these hardware companies are in, reminds me of a conversation I had at RetailNOW at the welcome reception. I think it was about 7 years ago, and I was talking to a receipt printer manufacturer about commoditization. I said, how is this impacting you? And I remember it was loud music. It was hard to hear, and I had to lean in. And he said to me, if we don't change, we'll be out of business. And I was like, wow, that is a stark reality. But since then, I've seen that organization, I'm not going to name them, but they've been very aggressive catering to these ISVs and the DISDs and building as many partnerships as they can. And also product expansion is something that they've done. So they've pivoted. I'm curious to see how the other hardware vendors are going to be pivoting as well. So again, to recap, those first three macro trends: DISD churn and volatility in that niche ISV space, the relative steadiness of VARs, and then also where these hardware organizations going to pivot. And so we've talked a lot about churn, but I do, before we move ahead from these business models, I do have to talk about growth. So you know how many new RSPA members have come on board in the past 14 and a half months? Right? 181 organizations have never been part of the RSPA before, and they've joined the RSPA again in the past 14 and a half months, right? That's incredible. So we do see all these new companies coming up as well. And so you have to ask yourself, what are they doing? What are the survivors? What are the thriving VARs and niche ISVs doing? And so they do a lot of things well, but the two things that we see them do differently, first is revenue diversification. And the second one is not only do they diversify their revenue, they get more recurring revenue than they do non-recurring revenue. So let's talk about revenue diversification first. This is a chart that is from the RSPA Retail IT Channel KPI study that we published earlier this year. I'm not going to walk you through every number, but I'm going to share with you some of the highlights from this. So this chart is talking about revenue streams of the VARs were identified in blue, and then the hybrids. Those are those, DISDs, the niche. They're a VAR, and they also they're also leading with their own software as well. And it's, where does their revenue come from? You just see on the far left, the VARs, you can see payments. They are heavily reliant on their revenue coming from payments. Almost half of them get half or more of their revenue from payments. And then if you look at the orange, that's the hybrids. You can see it's very well spread out, right? They do have some payments. That's about 17%. Software's about 17%. But the leading, where they get most of their revenue from is services. And you don't see one of those categories dominating. About 25% get their revenue from services. So again, revenue diversification for these more sophisticated companies, that's how we're seeing them really able to sustain a healthy business model. So let's talk about recurring revenue. And this chart is about the VAR and ISV transition to the as a service recurring revenue business model. Again, not to dive deep into all the numbers, but on the left side of the chart, that's more recurring revenue, including the folks on the far left. A third of the industry is completely transitioned. Almost all of their revenue is on a recurring basis. Then you see on the far right side, those who are partially, barely, or not transitioned at all, that accumulates for about 20% of the industry. So that's for 2023. That's looking behind. Looking ahead, what's projected for 2024? You can see how the left side of the chart, more recurring revenue, that's just getting bigger and bigger, right? You can see how it went from 33% completely transitioned up to almost half plan to be completely transitioned in 1 year by the end of this year. So again, the punchline is more recurring revenue, revenue diversification. That is definitely a trend that's moving up that we see in the retail IT channel. We've got to look at vertical markets first, right? What vertical markets are the most popular? Same as we've seen for many years. The core markets of retail, restaurant, and grocery, those are the dominant markets. But let's look and see, what are the niche markets that are gaining traction? The one that we see the most is wine, beer, and liquor. That emerged to the top during COVID, and that has not receded at all. So that's at 45% of the folks who participate in the retail IT channel KPI study are playing in the wine, beer, and liquor market. Strong second place, ethnic, grocery, and restaurant at 28%. Right behind that is cannabis at 21%. That's pretty impressive because cannabis is not legal in every state or province in North America. And then a cluster behind that is entertainment and hotels and garden and nursery. So let's dive into a couple of those niche markets, starting with ethnic and grocery. So this is a Mexican restaurant. Some of the photos here are compliments of RSPA members Servion Systems and EdgeServe. This is one of their customers. Data point I wanted to share with you is the National Bureau of Economic Research says that immigrants are 80% more likely to start a business than native-born Americans. Not 8%, not 18%, 80%. And as an RSPA member told me when I talked to him about this phenomenon, he's an immigrant, and he said, the American dream is to get a good job and have a nice house. And he said the number one thing he said for the immigrants that he works with is to own your own business and to really control your own destiny. So again, the ethnic vertical been growing. We continue to see that growing. Next, I want to talk about the macro trend of the rising interest in what we call the sin stocks, right? We talked about beer, wine, liquor, and then cannabis, and that's an example that we have here. This is some of the RSPA members who attended MJ BizCon. That's the number one, the largest cannabis conference that we attended late last year. And so the biggest trend in the cannabis space is the U.S. Department of Justice. They began the process to reschedule marijuana from a highly restricted Schedule 1 to a less regulated Schedule 3. And this really is starting to open up the door. If it creates a path for banks and payments and electronic payments to be taken in the cannabis space. Now, that's not coming around the corner anytime soon, but this is the first step going down that path. I also have to say, for folks who aren't as familiar in this market, right, when you talk about what's Schedule 1, what's Schedule 3. So Schedule 1 means no medical viability or usage, and then a high abuse rate. And along currently, cannabis is in that, along with heroin and LSD. Right. So now it's going to move into Schedule 3 along with steroids and codeine, where you can see they have a medicinal use. There's also where it could be, some abuse there as well. Schedule 2, so where cannabis is ranked worse than right now, is cocaine, fentanyl, and meth. And so my guess is that the folks listening to this podcast right now, the folks who attended RetailNOW, right, some of them will admit, oh, I consume cannabis. I just had some. I have some in my pocket. I might have some in my room. But no one's going to be like, oh, yeah, I got cocaine back in my room. You want to split some with me? Right. So again, cannabis being moved into a more appropriate schedule, that's really going to open up the door. So again, the next two macro trends that we see, the increase in the ethnic vertical and also interest in sin stocks. So that's 7 of our 8 macro trends. And so who's tying all of this together? Who's helping VARs expand? Who are hardware partners catering to? Who's creating these new revenue streams to get into services and recurring revenue opportunities? It's the innovative niche ISVs. Right now, this chart that I'm showing, again, those listening audio only can't see it, but it's a list of almost 160 logos that you see on the screen. These are current RSPA software provider members. Now, if you just join the association, you might not see your logo up here. We have a hard time keeping up in terms of all the new folks who have come on board. And this is where I say, sorry, not sorry that the logos are so small. The RSPA now has almost 160 software providers inside of our community. And again, these niche software providers, they're the ones who are leading the way into the niches, right? We talked about the sin stocks. You can see on here those who cater to liquor, those who cater to cannabis. We also see them as a technology gateway. You see a big cluster up there for AI, right? A lot of those are new companies on the scene. Online ordering, right? That's helping VARs get into that as well. E-commerce as well. And then also they're improving the customer experience through personalized analytics as well. VARs have been the center stage of this industry, but the reality is today in 2024, they are sharing that stage now with the ISVs. And folks used to say, oh, the channel, it has way too much payments at this point. But the reality is on the show floor at RetailNOW, almost half of the exhibitors lead with software and only about 15% lead with payments. So that is trend number 8, the increase that we see in innovative niche ISVs who are really leading the way in our industry. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot that I just gave you in about 15 minutes there. And so, one way to put it is, Dorothy, the Wizard of Oz, right? She said lions and tigers and bears, oh my, right? For us in the industry, be robots and tablets and payments. Oh my, the image that you see, this is when Judy Garland meets AI. Actually, we had to make one manual change. AI did not recognize that Dorothy should have red slippers on, so we had to make that modification there. But the reality is, like in our industry today, life was a lot simpler when it was just cash registers. One of our members, Harry Mitchell, he runs a VAR up in Canada. I was in a meeting with him recently. He talked about this technological change. He said it was in our lifetime that the only technology that was inside of a store was a light switch, right? The microphone, we have a cleanup in aisle 6, and then the cash register. But now it's really expanded into what we see here today. And so these 8 macro trends are the context for our industry. But the big question is, what do you do about it, right? This isn't just some academic exercise. So the RSPA gets the vantage point where we get to see what successful solution providers do. We want to share with you what we think are our community's top two competitive advantages. The first one is the ability to try, test, measure, and adapt. And I have to say, our community deserves credit for trying and testing and measuring, adapting over the past several years. It was actually 10 years ago at Retail Now, on the Retail Now General Session stage, a young man took the gavel as RSPA board chair, and he challenged the community. And so, folks looking at this slide, you might recognize him. Yes, that was me 10 years ago. I was named chair of the RSPA board way back in 2014. And so, I challenged the resellers of our community to add managed services, digital signage, remote monitoring, and remote management monitoring, mobility, and more. And the VARs have definitely done that. We challenge the vendors and distributors develop recurring revenue friendly channel programs. They've done that. We challenge the RSPA to add POS adjacent new members, right? Check, check, check on all those. We have as an industry, we have to continue to try, test, measure, and adapt, right? We have to keep our adaptation muscles strong. Bureaucratic companies stink at try, test, measure, and adapt. We can be excellent at it. Another way to look at try, test, measure, adapt, I did a podcast with one of our members, Lucas Systems, Brad and Owen Lucas, and they talked about when they played football, their coach would always tell them, keep your feet moving, right? Don't get caught flat-footed. That's really what try, test, measure, and adapt is all about. Let's make sure we keep our feet moving. The number two action that is a competitive advantage in our industry is extreme personal customer service. And so some VARs and ISVs in the audience, they might be thinking, yeah, we're good. We have good personal customer service. But my question is, are you memorable, right? Do customers say that you're special, right? And so I'm going to spend a few minutes here illustrating what is and isn't extreme personal customer service. So one example of not stellar customer service, RSPA has a self-storage unit. We had to move into a new one of those. So, self-storage units, they're nondescript. And so we compared the rates. We met at the office in person, signed the agreement. It was good, nothing special whatsoever. So less than 6 months into us signing a contract with them, we receive in the mail a generic postcard with a 17% rate increase and this line on there that says, we value your business and appreciate your continued patronage, right? Do you really? If you really valued my business, it seems like you wouldn't jack up my rates by 17% 5 months into it. So let's focus on positive extreme customer service. And to do that, we can turn to RSPA members. And the first one I want to talk about is a VAR in Vermont. And so this VAR, what he does is he competes against a lot of these giant VC-backed POS providers who don't have local service. And he says, let's do this right now. You call them up and we see how quickly you can get somebody on the phone. And you call my company and see how quickly we can get somebody on the phone. He does that live right there. We have a VAR in California. There are about 10 employees, so a decent sized reseller. Every customer has the owner's cell phone number. Now you might think, wow, that's unbelievable. Now, does he get occasionally a call on a Sunday or an evening call that interrupts what he's doing? Sure, but he has a near 100% retention rate from his customers. And we work with him on an annual survey every year, and his survey scores are incredible. I mean, at the top percentile for sure in our industry. Another example of extreme personal customer service, a reseller in Tennessee. There was a snowstorm there, and Tennessee isn't equipped to handle those snowstorms. So their competition was closed for multiple days for on-site service calls. What did this VAR do? They went out of their way. They rented Jeeps so they could do on-site service calls, and they kicked their competition's frozen butts that week when they did that. Last example I want to give is a VAR in New Hampshire. They work with a lot of Goodwill and Salvation Armies. And so those organizations were challenged processing donated goods, right? Very manual, very disjointed. So they went and developed a new inventory management system that integrates with the POS system they were providing to make sure that that organization can run better than they ever have before. Right? So that's what those solution providers have done. What can you do? Well, if you live anywhere in the United States or Canada and you're not an 800 number, You can eat at a local restaurant, right? You can shop at the local retailer, right? You can say hello in person. You can give them a handshake. Make sure it's a firm one. Nobody likes a dead fish handshake, right? You can look them in the eye. Right. So, like the examples that I just shared with you, you can go beyond standard customer service to be personable, to be memorable, right? Take problems and annihilate them, right? Good service is no longer good enough, right? When providing personal customer service, you have to be extreme. You have to overreact. An old boss of mine used to say, right, if you're going to kill an ant, you want to overreact. Kill an ant with an anvil, right? Just don't crush it with your thumb, right? An anvil is going to make sure that problem is solved once and for all. You want to make sure that you overreact to the situation here. So you might be asking, what's the RSPA doing to provide extreme personal customer service? So first, we provide what we call RSPA white glove service. Our dedicated member services team of Peggy Fry, Nicole Green, and Ashley Nagy, they don't just say, hey, congratulations, you're a new member, good luck, go get them. They will do warm one-on-one introductions on your behalf. They will help you navigate our growing community and navigate all our services with a personal one-on-one touch for what you need. We've also developed what we call RSPA ISV Spill the Tea. Every couple months, we get about a dozen software developers who come on to an online forum, and in 90-second segments, they share their value offering, and then there's Q&A at the end, right? You get to hear them in small group settings and then interact with them after those sessions. And then RetailNOW, again, is a great event that attracts about 1,600 people, but if you want a leadership conference, you can really have deep get-to-know time with some of your fellow attendees in the industry. RSPA Inspires our leadership conference. We had a record 240 attendees earlier this year, and you want to make sure you save the date. We'd love to see it Inspire 2025, January 26th through 29th in Curacao. The RSPA is here for you, and we as a community are here for each other. And to emphasize that point, I want to end with a quote from Seth Godin. And so he shares an insight that I think really articulates what makes our community special. He says the movement happens when people talk to one another, when ideas spread within the community, and most of all, when peer support leads people to do what they always knew was the right thing. Right? You know that try, test, measure, and adapt and extreme personal customer service are the right thing to do. Right? And the RSPA community, with all of us working together and having fun at RetailNOW, we're going to have fun and then go back home and create opportunities with each other, right? Let's double down on our unique strengths. Let's seize the future together. Let's make this industry even better than it is today. Thank you very much, and we hope you enjoyed the State of the Industry Report. And we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast. If you did, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. And if you'd like to learn more best practices for VARs and ISVs in the retail technology industry, check out the RSPA blog. You can find it at gorspa.org and clicking on RSPA blog. Before we go, thanks to RSPA Marketing Director Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the retail technology ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.